Great. So once again, just like to welcome everyone for joining us today on the Down Payment Assistance Best Practices webinar. And today we will be focusing on shared equity. Briefly, here is our agenda. If you could take a minute to just type your name into the chat, that'd be super helpful. Love for everyone to see who's here. And it's also a great way for us to track who's attending. Also, today's session is going to focus on shared equity, homeownership options, and how they intersect with down payment assistance to make homeownership more accessible. The content will be presented by subject matter experts that I will introduce shortly. The discussion will start with the basics of shared equity and then move into how it compares to conventional homeownership. And then we'll take a closer look at how the city of Minneapolis is using down payment assistance and shared equity to help address the home ownership gap. We will have some time for question and discussions and just a quick promotion of our next meeting, which has been scheduled for June 22nd. So before I welcome our speakers, I would just like to briefly highlight the best practices were launched in January. Many of you have attended our previous meetings, but as a reminder, I just want to share that these best practices, excuse me, were developed by a cross-sector working group of subject matter experts as a first step towards the goal of improving the down payment ecosystem. And the benefits here that we have identified around having best practices include promoting standardization and transparency for the consumer and the industry. We often hear that it's very difficult both for home buyers and realtors and loan officers to use best practice. Use DPA. There's a lot of confusion that happens. We want to remove barriers that limit this access and help to create a more successful purchase transaction. We would like to see a greater investment in down payment assistance, which is already starting to happen. I think many of you heard about the win at the legislature, a lot of investment in down payment assistance. But again, having more investment to meet the need of consumers, helping to kind of create a pathway for those who without DPA would not be able to access homeownership. And then finally, we believe that the best practices and these meetings that we're doing are a great way to begin to build coalition among DPA providers statewide, and so that we can start to work collectively towards implementing best practices and reaching these goals. So today we have three presenters. I think many of you are familiar with these subject matter experts, but briefly, Jeff Washburn and Stacy Horowitz from the CLCT, and then Roxanne Young-Kimball from the city of Minneapolis will be presenting. I am going to be monitoring questions in the chat. Feel free to pop them in if you have something you would like to discuss. And also, I think we're a small enough group that if you want to unmute, that's okay as well. So I'm going to start by turning it over to Jeff.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Recognize a lot of familiar names. It's good seeing everyone. So and Jeff Washburn with the City of Lakes Community Land Trust. I've been with the City of Lakes Community Land Trust for the last 20 years now. And our organization's grown to close to about 370 homes in trust, and we're getting close to 500 households assisted. The difference between those figures is the resales. You want me to be clicking through? All right, perfect. So my part of this presentation is really to talk higher level about the different types of buyer assistance that are available and how they compare. And one of the things that I think, especially within the community land trust world, we've become very aware of is this balance between trying to grow individual wealth and that of long-term or permanent affordability. And it's tough to try and bring both of those up at the same time. And a lot of, I think, the considerations that communities and organizations need to go through is, what are they trying to achieve? If they're really trying to build individual wealth, then perhaps certain types of programs are going to benefit households in that wealth building. If organizations or communities are trying to ensure and maintain long-term affordability, then that's going to also potentially impact how much a homeowner is going to be able to make if and when they ever decide to sell. And all this stuff is also impacted by the incomes that we're trying to serve, market conditions. Is it a hot market? Is it a neighborhood that's tough to incent households to move into? And then, what essentially is the community looking for, and having our ears to the ground and how we are able to respond to our communities, I think will also impact what approach an organization or a city or a community is looking to employ. And so on the continuum, looking at these different options, and I would argue even if you look to the far left, if we're looking to just increase individual wealth, then a straight out grant is probably the easiest and quickest way to build individual wealth. Just writing a household a check to help them buy a home in the form of straight down payment assistance would be on the very far left. But then as we move right, utilizing tools like Brooke had mentioned, the most recent win of forgivable down payment assistance for first generation buyers is a great example of dollars that will ultimately, if a household stays in the home for 5 years, result in additional wealth. Traditional home ownership, where the household is coming up with their own funds coming into the purchase, a deferred interest loan, where those dollars can be used as down payment, but upon refinance or upon sale, they need to be returned to the originator of those funds. And then permanently affordable home ownership, which includes things like the community land trust, but it also could be shared equity mortgages or deed restrictions or restrictive covenants, all with some sort of a mechanism that tries to keep the property affordable for future generations of buyers. And then, we move on to affordable rental, which is going to have some sort of ideally long-term either investment made to keep those units permanently affordable, or in some cases receive some sort of ongoing subsidization of the rent prices for the lower income households. So over the next 3 slides, we're going to do just a little deeper dive into forgivable loans, the deferred interest loan, and then permanently affordable mechanisms. And so I think the things I want to call out in this first slide for folks on this presentation are that very first, or I guess I'll call it to the left bar graph. And what we're doing here is establishing that in today's market, just get some agreement, that we're looking at a property that costs $270,000, and we're targeting a household at 60% of area median income, and we're assuming that household can get a $181,000 mortgage. And so that difference, we're bridging with an $89,000, in this case, forgivable loan. And so at closing, the buyer's bringing their mortgage for $181,000, and the subsidy source for the forgivable loan provider is bringing an $89,000 check to the table. Makes sense. The homeowner's in the home, and in this assumption, 7 years later, they decide to sell. And given that we're assuming 6% annual increases in home values and a 3% annual income inflation, that the property 7 years later is going to be worth, or is going to appraise at $406,000. At that point in time, the homeowner benefits from the $89,000 because they've satisfied the terms of that down payment assistance. And if we as a community want to keep that home affordable, we now need to come up with $183,000 to make the next household at 60% median income able to purchase that property. And so let's assume 7 years later that household decides to sell. You can see here in the bar graphs that household is now walking away with $183,000 and forgivable down payment assistance, but we as a community need to come up with $335,000. Play this out to the third resale at 21 years. Value of the property is $918,000. Household, we make these assumptions of income and property values, is now going to need $580,000 in down payment assistance to make that home affordable. This, great opportunity through that first generation down payment assistance to help bridge households getting into home ownership. It creates an opportunity for wealth creation. This tool was used back in the mortgage foreclosure crisis as well to help incent households to buy in certain parts, in our case, of the city of Minneapolis. So it helped incent purchasing and buying in neighborhoods that maybe were challenging at the time. And it also works well for smaller amounts of money to go in, and you're able to just create an incentive for households to get into home ownership. It doesn't require a ton of staff time either to administer, and assuming that the household stays in for the duration of time. If it is forgivable over time, it's a pretty simple thing to administer. The deferred interest loan, a little bit more complicated. We still start with the same assumption of a household that needs $89,000 to bridge into home ownership. Let's assume, though, at 7 years, they sell. At that point in time, that $89,000 goes back to the provider. But that provider, if they want to keep the home affordable, property affordable to 60% AMI, needs to then come up with $94,000 to add to the $89,000 that got back, or that they get received back at the sale of the property. Playing this out over the next 2 resales, you'll see that it's not nearly as costly as the forgivable down payment assistance, but at 21 years, the community at that point in time needs to still come up with $245,000 at year 21 to create or maintain the affordability of that particular property. It's used when maybe a little bit more money can be made available, and it starts to get at some of the wealth creation, but not nearly as much as that down payment assistance, forgivable down payment assistance. And it requires a bit more staff capacity to make sure that they're monitoring it, and they're able to, on the front side, I would imagine from a provider perspective, also making sure that there's a bucket of funds that can be added, assuming that there's going to be some sort of resales down the road that they need to plan for if they want to keep those homes affordable. Then last on kind of that continuum that we're going to take a look into, permanent affordability. So mechanisms like shared equity mortgages, deed restriction, community land trust approaches. We're coming in with $89,000 of that same affordability assistance. And then depending on the mechanism, I'll try to right size these mechanisms, whether it be a fixed rate appreciation model, or in our case, we use a 25% appraisal based approach. The goal of those models is to work at keeping those homes affordable without having to raise additional affordability assistance to put into the property. And so in this case, that $89,000 is put in on the front end. No additional dollars, if the model's set up correctly, are going to be needed at future transactions. And essentially the next buyer is able to go out and get a mortgage for the amount that their income would allow them to be able to get at. And so it takes a one-time investment and keep it affordable for multiple generations of home buyers. I think increasingly what I'm seeing, at least from the public sector, is as more and more affordability gap or investments are needed to create affordability. We're easily into 6 digits now. The public sector policymakers are saying, look, if we're putting this much in, we want to see multiple benefits. And one of the ways to do that is through mechanisms like community land trusts, or other types of mechanisms to keep homes affordable. They do take time. There's a lot of stewardship that's involved in this process, and depending on the model, there are also additional costs to maintain that. I think one of the challenges with an appraisal-based approach is that we have to pay for an appraisal, and that adds up over time. Whereas some of the other mechanisms, like a fixed rate approach, can be quickly determined and maybe doesn't take as much staff or financial capacity to do as well. So when we line all three of these up next to each other over the same durations of time, you'll see that the first set of bar graphs, we put in $89,000. That was the same, but over time, it begins to cost the community considerably more, or provider considerably more to keep those properties affordable, if it's through a DPA, forgivable down payment assistance program, or even a deferred loan, starts to add up over time for a community. And with a long-term affordable approach, perpetually affordable approach, like the land trust, we can gain affordability. But there are those trade-offs. Going back to that second slide that I was talking through, is it comes at a cost to what a household is able to benefit from if and when they go to sell, if it does have a permanent affordable type of model versus a down payment assistance loan. And this off to my colleague, Stacy.
Hello, everyone. Stacy Horowitz with the City of Lakes Community Land Trust. And we thought it would be helpful to compare shared equity options with conventional home ownership. So as part of our conversation this afternoon, we're going to look at a conventional transaction compared to community land trust and the perpetual affordable homeownership program that the City of Minneapolis has in place. And so for purposes of the community land trust, we'll be using the CLCLT's appraisal-based model, which is 25% of any change in market value is the homeowners and 75% stays with the property. And for the perpetual affordable homeownership program, it's a 2% fixed appreciation compounded annually on the anniversary of the closing. To help kind of set the stage for the comparison, we just wanted to review a few elements of terminology. One of those is, as we talk about affordability gap in the comparison, we're basically referring to the public subsidy that's provided to reduce the cost of ownership. The CLCLT is going to be referencing the City of Lakes Community Land Trust. You'll see the initials PAH, which is in reference to the Perpetual Affordable Homeownership Program through the City of Minneapolis. And then we also wanted to reference PMI, which you'll see comes into play with the conventional transaction, which is private mortgage insurance. So going into the comparison, we have the assumptions that we're looking at a 30-year conventional fixed rate mortgage at approximately a 7% interest rate. We also are assuming that the conventional transaction requires private mortgage insurance in that the down payment isn't sufficient enough to satisfy, and the initial market price is the same for all options. So as we look generally at the comparison between the different ownership options, the first column there is some different categories that we look at when we all look at home ownership. And then we'll be looking at the conventional in the first column, the PAH program through the city in the second column, and the land trust at the end. The initial market value, the purchase price for a home, is going to be the same. The market value does not vary between the different options. Where you will see the variation start to begin is in the down payment and the affordability gap. So in the conventional transaction, we're assuming a buyer has $10,000 of either own funds, gift, whatever, a secondary source for down payment. And in the shared equity or the PAH, long-term affordable, perpetual affordable options through the land trust and the PAH, we're putting $100,000 into the transaction in affordability. That leaves a buyer purchase price of $290,000 for a conventional and $200,000 for the different perpetual affordable ownership options. The other difference you'll see is in the principal and interest and the taxes. And you can see in the chart that conventional is just under $2,000 for that principal and interest, and the PAH and the CLCLT is just slightly over $1,300. The property taxes are going to vary again, more focused on the city of Minneapolis at this time, in the fact that the perpetual affordable homeownership options are assessed at a rate on the affordable price versus, or the affordable amount versus the full market value. So that's why you're seeing a slight difference in the property taxes. This may not be applicable in all communities, but it is in Minneapolis. The insurance will remain the same. And then, as I mentioned, in the conventional, we have the private mortgage insurance of $120 for this particular example. So at the end of the day, a total monthly cost for a conventional, we're estimating at $2,450, and the perpetual affordable homeownership program at just a little over $1,700, and the land trust just a little under $1,700. Some of the other things to consider when looking at the comparison of the ownership options are some of the other resale restrictions in the land ownership. In a conventional, you're going to have no income restrictions, no resale restrictions, and the homeowner is going to own both the home and the land. In the perpetual affordable homeownership program, there are going to be income restrictions, so 80% or less of area median income, and then some different variations of assistance as we look at different income levels. There are resale restrictions in the PAH model, and the land trust ownership is going to remain with the homeowner. In the land trust transaction, there are the similar income restrictions and resale restrictions, and in most cases, the land trust is going to own the land. As we look at the monthly housing cost versus savings, conventional versus PAH, we're basically looking at about $745 in our example on a monthly savings. Over 5 years, just under $45,000 in basic housing cost savings for a PAH homeowner versus conventional. And then versus the land trust, you see a little bit more in savings of $775 or just, $46,500 over the 5 years. At some point in time in the future, the homeowner who purchased that home decided to sell. And the assumptions as we look at this example is the fact that the homeowner is selling after 5 years. We're assuming a market appreciation of approximately 2.5% each year, and that all payments are made on the mortgage. The other assumption that we're making in this example is that there's no other liens taken out, and any other down payment assistance was either grants or they were forgiven. Again, when we look at that appraised market value, you will see there isn't a difference between the conventional or the perpetual affordable homeownership options. As we mentioned in the beginning of the comparison, that initial appraised value was the same. So across all three, you're going to see a net change in value that doesn't vary based on market value. Where you will begin to see the change is in the new sale price. So with the conventional, it is going to be that new appraised value of $340,000. In the PAH, because of the 2% fixed appreciation, the new sale price will be $216,486. And we'll show you how we get to that in just a moment. And if you remember, the purchase price to the buyer was $200,000 in the original transaction. So this is that 2% fixed appreciation over time. And then in the land trust, again, the purchase price at the beginning with that $100,000 down payment affordability gap left the purchase price of $200,000 as well. And with our our resale formula of 25% and 75% gets us to a $210,000 new sale price. And we're going to cover how each of those amounts are calculated. So for the perpetual affordable homeownership program and that 2%, you'll see that we started out with the $200,000 in that initial buyer price. And then at the anniversary of the closing year one, 2% of that $200,000 was added to the sale price to a new buyer. And we do that with each year. And in the example that we have for the resale, we looked at a 5-year sale price, which is how we got to the $216,000 at the very end of the column there for the new sale price to the new buyer. And then for the land trust affordable price, our calculation looks at the change in value from the new appraised value, from the initial appraised value. So we saw a net change in $40,000. As mentioned, the equity share is 25% of that net change in value is homeowner market equity share, and 30,000 or 75% of that change stays with the property. So when we look generally at a new affordable sale price, it's going to be that original purchase price of 200,000 plus the homeowner equity share of 10,000 for that new sale price of 210,000. And one of the things when we have started to talk about the different perpetual affordable homeownership options is really thinking through kind of what does this all boil down to at time of sale. And we wanted to compare the conventional, again, with the two different options that we're looking at this afternoon. And what does that kind of look like from a potential wealth building perspective? So with the conventional, we have a new sale price of $340,000. And we have a principal balance of estimated about $275,000. We're doing 6% on real estate fees to sell the home, so estimating about $19,200. And the estimated net proceeds are $35,200. Because there wasn't really savings per se from just a basic housing cost, estimating the wealth built at about $35,200. From a perspective of the PAH, and we wanted to keep some of these numbers consistent, so we just kept the real estate fees consistent. But this would fluctuate a little bit based on the new sale price. But we're looking at $216,486 for the affordable PAH program, and minus estimating a pay down to about $189,000, $190,000 or so. Real estate fees about the same, and an estimated net proceeds of $7,486. But also taking into consideration that throughout the time of ownership, there was that basic savings and from that perpetual affordable investment of just under $45,000. You're seeing an estimated wealth built over time of $52,186. And then you can see also in the land trust, it's similar in the fact that, you know, our new sale price is lower, so the estimated net proceeds are lower, but you're still coming in at around $47,000, $48,000 in estimated wealth built. And I will hand it over to Roxanne Kimball-Young.
Thanks so much, Jeff and Stacy, for framing what shared equity housing can look like. To those of you who'd like to get started, I thought I'd talk about an example of how to apply what Jeff and Stacy just discussed to your community. Next slide, please. First is to look closely at the housing market in your community. It's best practice to get a sense of what the housing needs are in your community and be sure you understand the experience of different races and ethnicities. Listed here are some of the different sources that we've used in Minneapolis. We've used all of these sources for different types of analysis, and I'm sure there are more. Some of the key questions that you want to ask are, what are the incomes of the people in my community? How much house can the average household afford? What are the home sale prices in my community? And how much divide is there between the home sale prices and what the different races and ethnicities in my area can afford? Next slide, please. In the next couple of slides, I'll show you how our market analysis framed a policy story for our council. First, we looked at where city-owned development land is and why. Much of the property that's owned by the city of Minneapolis is tied specifically to areas that have historically been intentionally targeted by racist policies. That first map is redlining in the 1930s, which constrained lending and investment in the areas marked in red and yellow on the map, where BIPOC households were disproportionately living. The next map is the 2008 foreclosure crisis, which was born from subprime lending that disproportionately was marketed to BIPOC households. Those and other past policies have devalued communities in Minneapolis where BIPOC people live and caused market failure in parts of our city. So we're intervening as city government to try to positively turn the tide for reinvestment in order to meet community goals. Next slide, please. Next, we analyzed what eliminating racial disparities in homeownership would mean in our city. To explain this chart, in Minneapolis in 2018, when we did our study, 57% of white Minneapolis residents owned their home. We looked at the ownership rate for people of color households, disaggregated by race, and then we calculated what it would take to eliminate racial disparities for each race and ethnicity. From that exercise, we concluded that in order to eliminate the racial disparities in 2018, we need to serve 13,000 BIPOC renters. Currently, our programs serve about 130 households a year. So at our current place, it's going to take 100 years for us to solve the racial disparities of 2018. This is one of the key messages that we delivered to our council about why we need to increase our investments in affordable homeownership. Next slide, please. Next, we looked at supply. We wanted to understand how many affordable homes there were for each band of area median income and how many white renters or BIPOC renters there were in each band. And the colors on this slide have changed, so give me just a second. So in dark blue are the number of ownership sales that happened in the city of Minneapolis that were affordable to the AMI range that we were looking at. In light blue are the number of BIPOC renters that are in that AMI range, and in gray are the number of white renters in that AMI range. There are a few key conclusions that came from this slide. Above 80% AMI, there are 4 white renter households for every 1 BIPOC renter household. Our government programs can't discriminate by race. So that means if we focus above 80% AMI, there's only a 1 in 5 chance that we serve a BIPOC household. Below 80% AMI, there's a more even distribution of renters and the odds are more like a 50-50 chance. Over 70% of BIPOC renters have incomes below 50% AMI, and there are virtually no homes that are affordable to this price range. If our goal is to eliminate racial disparities in homeownership, which means serving 13,000 BIPOC renters, then we must have ownership strategies that are below 50% AMI. And then finally, we framed the subsidy need. At the time of this study, the average cost for a new construction home was $330,000. Can you go to the next slide? Thank you. So the average cost for a new construction home was $330,000. That's that top line. The median value of homes was $280,000, which is the middle dotted line. And we calculated the typical value gap need in order to create a new unit of housing. So that's $70,000 all the way across at the top. Then we used the assumptions that were published by the Metropolitan Council to determine what a household of 4 in the middle of each of the income brackets that I just talked about could afford to pay for a first mortgage. That's in the dark blue. The difference between the appraised value of $280,000 and the affordable first mortgage represents the affordability gap that we need to be prepared to bring to the table as a community. And that's the dark orange. We did all of this math in order to make it more clear how to achieve our council's policy objective of eliminating racial disparities in homeownership. Now there's all sorts of variation in the market. There are homes, although not many, that sell for less than $280,000. There are areas of the city where you can't buy anything below $400,000. And because our program is trying to serve BIPOC renters wherever they want to buy, our council approved a few different solutions. If you could go to the next slide. In 2020, our council approved two different pathways in our homeownership programs. Effectively, when we provide direct support to buyers in a range between $10,000 to $35,000, we provide it as down payment assistance that is repayable and revolves within the program so we can serve more home buyers in the future. Effectively, the deferred loan concept that Jeff presented earlier. There are no limits on the resale price, and after repaying the deferred loan, home buyers keep all of the increase in value. When we make a substantive investment in a home to create affordability that doesn't otherwise exist in the market, then we enroll the unit in a shared equity model so that the home is perpetually affordable. And as Jeff mentioned, there are a range of different ways that we're doing this in Minneapolis. We created our own city perpetually affordable housing model. We invest in City of Lakes Community Land Trust. And then we also are partnering with several community members that are creating limited equity cooperatives. When we're creating perpetual affordability, we're ensuring that there's at least a 20% direct benefit that goes to the home buyer. So we're ensuring that the market value of the home is bought down by at least 20%. When we're enrolling in a perpetually affordable product. And the range is substantive. Sometimes we're providing as little as $70,000, sometimes we're providing as much as $300,000 in order to create affordability in a community that's not otherwise affordable. Next slide, please. Once you know what solutions you want, the next step is deciding how to fund your program. In Minneapolis, we've used all of the sources on this slide for down payment assistance at different times. Currently, most of our down payment assistance and shared equity investments are from federal sources, and they drive our program rules. And then we layer federal sources with state and city and private sources in order to fill the full gap need. Particularly on many of our projects that have over a 200,000 unit subsidy, it takes a little bit of money from all of the sources that are framed on this side in order to make a project like that work. Next slide. The next step on your program creation journey is to decide how to administer. Direct administration may seem easy, but it can be really hard. There's lots of individual homebuyer circumstances to consider. There are fair lending and CFPB requirements, which I'm going to embarrass myself and not remember what CFPB stands for at this moment. Generally it works best if you have a small one-time specialized program. It gives you the most control as the DPA provider or as the shared equity provider over implementation, but then effectively it also gives you all of the headaches of trying to administer directly. In the middle, if you have a defined program, then you can contract with an administrator to implement it. This is the strategy that Minneapolis uses for our down payment assistance and also for administration of our city perpetually affordable housing program. We have contracts with NeighborWorks Home Partners, City of Lakes Community Land Trust, and Build Wealth. And they're responsible for marketing, underwriting, closing, and seeking reimbursement or earning fees to support their work as homes close. The benefit of contracting with an administrator is multiple organizations can offer the same city-defined product. And the organizations often have much deeper relationships within community than the city can have. Many of our administrators also offer homebuyer education services, and we benefit from the outreach that they are already doing within community in order to create a pipeline of homebuyers. And then on the far right, if an organization in your community already has their own defined program, you can simply support them as a subrecipient. This is the strategy Minneapolis is using for CLCLT's Homebuyer Initiated Program and Build Wealth's 9,000 Equities Program. Both of those organizations did the work to develop the program design and concept, and they're the sole providers of those particular programs. And so in those cases, it doesn't make sense for the city to come in and say, we're going to create our own program and then ask you to administer it. The easiest path is to simply support the program that they've defined. So if you decide to move forward, here are some of the different resources that can get you started on program design and administration. And I think with that, we can take any questions.
So I am gonna stop sharing my screen for a minute just because I think it is a little easier if we can see people. So I think open to questions, feedback, thoughts from anyone on the call to any one of our speakers.
I think my question goes towards perpetual affordability. One of the benefits of home ownership is the opportunity to benefit from the equity that is of home ownership, right? So what are we doing to mitigate this factor of like the slow growth of equity with 2% equity?
That's a great question, Jerica, and good to see you. Hello. I think the answer to that question is with shared equity homeownership, and Brooke, if you wouldn't mind pulling up the slide that does the comparison of the models.
Yep, just give me a sec here.
Yep. With shared equity homeownership, one of the ways that there's a benefit to home buyers is having a significantly lower first mortgage payment than would be accessed in conventional home ownership. So I want to pull up the slide that actually talks about that so that we can speak to it more clearly and effectively. And Jeff, I'm very open to.
Is this the correct one, Roxanne?
No, I think it's 2 slides after that. Oh, keep going. There we go.
The resale and the, okay, this one? All right.
Yeah, this is the one. Thank you. Thank you for following my unclear instructions, Brooke. I appreciate you. So just to spend a little more time on this slide, it's true that in conventional homeownership, a homeowner is earning an estimated net proceeds of $35,000. And in the shared equity models, that rate of return is lower. However, in the shared equity models, there's also a significant savings that's happening from having a much lower first mortgage than would have been possible in the conventional option. And so when those two things are added together, it can result in a net benefit to the homeowner that's actually greater than conventional ownership.
Looks like Jerica's having unstable connection, so just replied in the chat. So
I would also offer, if I might, that
go ahead.
the households that we've been able to assist over the years, by and large, almost exclusively, it's their options aren't that of should I buy a land trust home or should I go out and buy a market rate home. We've consistently really tried to target households at 50 or 60% of median income, and I think increasingly, that's 6 digits worth of an affordability investment that we're going out and raising for that. So it's the option, unless there's a family member or somebody else who's able to front them an increasingly a huge amount of money, they're not going to be able to bridge into home ownership without that large investment. The reason I bring that up is, for example, how do we take advantage of, or how would your households take advantage of the first generation down payment assistance funding that might be coming down, or that will be coming down the pipeline over the hopefully in the next 6 months or so, is that if a household can't get into a purchase offer or into a purchase agreement because they don't have the financing to get there, they're never going to be able to take advantage of that forgivable down payment assistance funding. And what I think increasingly, as we've seen values and the amount of gap needed to bridge folks into homeownership, is that the ability to take those or take advantage of those down payment assistance programs often requires a sizable, permanently affordable home ownership approach or model to be able to take advantage of those dollars. So the households aren't going to be able to benefit from some of these wealth creation tools unless they can get into a purchase agreement.
Great. Thank you for that, Jeff. Other questions?
Yeah, Nick Betcher here now at Minnesota Housing. I'm just a very interesting discussion and interesting data points. As I approach the question of like, what's the value to an individual home buyer, and I think Jeff started out with this early on. There's a community benefit and an individual benefit. As an individual, I can think of it as saying, well, I'm able to buy a $300,000 home for $250,000 essentially, and I'm agreeing that to be my neighbor's keeper, so to speak, and that when I go to sell my house, my rate of return is going to be reasonable, and it's going to be affordable. I'm going to keep my home affordable to people that are in a similar situation to what I am now. So I think it's sort of and I don't hear this very often from community land trust folks, but so push back if I'm off the mark here, but it's sort of reimagining what housing and homeownership is and can be and should be, to sort of push back on the culture and the sort of economic imperative to maximize increases in home value, and to view housing less as a commodity and more as a place to live that's going to be affordable to people of modest means in perpetuity.
Yeah, thanks for that, Nick. Okay. Other thoughts, questions? Hi, Stephanie.
Hi. And I know that the situation in the city where I work may not be universal, but we have found this to be in Edina a really valuable tool for a couple of reasons. One, we were experiencing, and I'm sure this is true in neighborhoods throughout the metropolitan, where there are pockets of teardowns, where there is a loss of supply of moderate priced housing, and those are being replaced with higher cost housing. And this is a tool to preserve some of this housing stock that is otherwise lost forever. So when it's perpetual, when it's in a land trust, they're not going to tear down those homes because it is owned by the land trust. So it has that extra benefit. And then what was stated before, in some cases, it is the mechanism by which people can afford to move into this home. And I know we get the criticism of, well, you're taking away some of the opportunities for wealth building. But I think some of our rationale is in some communities where the cost of housing is rising so exponentially that even the equity, the 35% or the 25% that is captured is still significant. And then it just has a long-term benefit by the house not being torn down.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. Other thoughts, comments? I wonder if Jeff or Roxanne, if you could speak to, so let's say I'm a consumer and I qualify for the first generation DPA that should be online as hopefully in the next 6 months, as you said, Jeff. And even with that, I still can't afford housing. I still need another, $100,000. How would that work out when I sell my home? So I get approved for this 30,000 or 32,000, let's say, forgivable first gen, and I come to the community land trust or the perpetually affordable housing program. How does that impact my equity and takeaway when I decide to sell in 5 to 7, 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, for homeowners, again, the terms for this DPA, as I understand, is a 5-year forgivable DPA. So provided they've stayed in the home for 5 years, that would essentially turn into their equity upon sale. So they would receive, assuming there isn't a drop in value of the property over time, they would be able to walk away with that $32,000 plus a portion of any increase in value, again, assuming that there was an increase in value on the property in the case of our community land trust. And hundreds of households have benefited from some sort of down payment assistance over the years. And really see that as homeowner equity for them. It's no different than if somebody came in with a large down payment of their own funds, again, assuming the values don't go down, that's their equity. That's embedded into the property that would allow them a lower mortgage payment. Be successful in homeownership.
And I think the key there is that it's forgivable, because where we do see impact upon resales are the recapture down payment. And it's incredibly beneficial when people purchase, because it does help to create that access that Jeff was referring to. But on the back end, sometimes if someone's getting 30, 40,000, 50,000 in recapture, that has to be paid back. That's not anything that, is coming from the land trust restrictions, but that's the other funding. And so that does have an impact at time of resale. So the forgivable piece is an important part of that down payment assistance that is received directly by a buyer.
Great. So depending on how, because we talked a lot about shared equity, but also many of you are DPA providers and thinking about how your DPA programs can be used and making sure, that your DPA accepts shared equity as an opportunity. And then depending on what your goals are around closing the gap, gaining access to homeownership, as Nick said, in terms of just the value of ownership. And then there is the opportunity, depending on how you structure your DPA, for communities to also help to build wealth in a scenario where a DPA is forgivable. So it can be yes and in some scenarios.
Yes.
Other questions from the audience, attendees?
I asked in the chat if the slides will be shared, because I would personally like to plagiarize.
I'm sure we can get them over to you, Stephanie. We've been posting the recordings, but I'm sure if you directly ask Roxanne or Jeff, they would send them to you and allow you to plagiarize.
May I plagiarize, Jeff and Roxanne?
It's easy.
Yes, that's just fine.
Modified by. I think we modified a few of those slides too.
Okay, thank you.
No need to recreate. Okay, well, I think unless there is other questions, we do have a little bit of time left, and I really hate to put you on the spot, but I'm gonna do it anyways, Jeff. Could you just give like a few minute summary of what's going on with the Urban League and the African American Community Land Trust? To just kind of help start spreading the word of what's happening and what your partnership has been and what the goal is around that. I know I'm kind of hitting you out of left field,
That's
but
fine.
okay.
So, probably a decade ago, we started looking at what it would take to significantly increase or decrease, I guess, the disparities between white and foundational Black households in ownership. And we realized we didn't know enough at that time. And so we engaged with the University of Minnesota, we being us, the Urban League. Urban Homeworks was also involved in this work early on. And because this was right about the time that we were coming out of the foreclosure crisis, and saw that, and we essentially we surveyed 1,000 individuals who identified as Black and also as Northsiders, and what came back resoundingly is that people wanted to live on the North Side, continue living on the North Side, and if they could own a home, they would like that opportunity to do so. But yet the other, data points that we were getting back was that, incomes weren't there, credit challenges were very evident, and we needed to go deeper, and we wanted to create a mechanism that would do, serve households of color, and specifically foundational Black households at a rate higher than what even the City of Lakes Community Land Trust is able to do. And so we said, well, let's go to the historical Black churches, and reach out to the leadership there, and can we create a mechanism that folks would be referred from the churches if they're interested in home ownership to the Urban League to go through their home buyer education classes there. And then if and at that point in time it was determined that still additional gap was needed, it was going to be suggested that they talk with the City of Lakes Community Land Trust. At the same time, we were raising dollars, so we received a commitment from Minnesota Housing for $500,000 and Hennepin County for $300,000. Pots of funds that we would use as households were referred to us from the Urban League that would be specifically for what we're calling the African American Community Land Trust, with the goal at the same time that leadership from the Urban League, Stair Step Foundation, on the ground strategies would be forming a community land trust of their own, so that once we got to the number we've been using, 20 homes in trust, households who came in through this program, those assets, those ground leases that we use would be transferred over to the African American Community Land Trust. So where we're at right now, we're still we're just now kind of getting some of those first referrals that we're starting to work with now, and the goal and plan is to help households, and the Urban League is taking the lead on developing this African American Community Land Trust. I think to the points that Roxanne brought up, still in this environment, you can't discriminate by race, and so the vehicle we used in all this was if a household was referred to us from the Urban League, that's what would qualify us to be able to use those funds. So trying to get at it from a different way. My hope is as we all start to poke and prod and push boundaries, we can get around these things and just recognize that discrimination got us here, and we need to be more proactive in how we serve households too. But until then, we need to be sensitive to those public funds, and this is the mechanism that we're using. Buyers through this program are buying homes through our buyer initiated program, which allows buyers to go out and choose any single family home or duplex of their choice in the city of Minneapolis. So initially, the geography is the city of Minneapolis, but I know for a fact that the African American CLT is planning on becoming a metro-wide serving entity, but at least in its earlier forms, it's just going to be city of Minneapolis.
Great, thank you for that, Jeff. Any questions about that? Mostly, I just wanted to, I think, start spreading the word. I think it's still pretty new to people. Miss Jerica?
No, I didn't want to derail the conversation, but I had another meeting and I wanted to let you guys know that the DPA program here at Ramsey County is going to be paused. I'm going to put it in the chat. We're going to be pausing until we hire another DPA person for this position, because I cannot do this on the side. It is a huge undertaking. And so right now, what we're doing is we're processing about 10 more applications that are in conditional approval mode. And so we'll be finishing those processes. We have closings up until like July, and hopefully we'll be hiring someone soon. So that job should be posted on Monday.
Thank you for that update. And with that, I will open the floor, I guess, either for questions for Jeff about any of the discussion points today, and then if others have updates that they would like to share about their DPA program. I think this is the place to do it. So thank you for that, Jerica. All right. Seeing no hands raised, no cameras coming on, or people unmuting or chat, all the new ways in which we engage.
Brooke, I guess
Go ahead, Nick.
I'll
Sorry,
just,
you weren't.
I'll
you
just
weren't
weigh in
fast
real
enough.
quick. I wish I had some more concrete information to share. I'm sure you all and MMCDC are wondering where's the money, and we are working on some very sizable appropriations from the legislature for external down payment assistance and some new resources for down payment assistance funds associated with agency first mortgage, Minnesota Housing First Mortgages, which are of course are offered through a network of lenders statewide, and we'll be having announcements to come on that in the months ahead.
Great, thank you for that. So essentially, I think everyone is in the know, but I don't know, what was $1 billion was invested in the housing continuum through the legislature. Of that, $100 million was set aside for a brand new first generation statewide DPA program that MMCDC will be the administrator for, and many of the local DPA providers will then originate that DPA. And as Nick was just saying, a lot of appropriations happened. It's going to be a big lift as Minnesota Housing gets through their steps and others get through what we need to do to get that program ramped up and going. And the hope is that, before the new year, something will be operationalized for that first generation DPA program. So all very exciting stuff. And, as we like to say, the real work begins now. So before I end today, I just want to remind everyone that on our website, a little screenshot here, under partner resources, you can find the best practice document. There's also additional information on adoption and endorsement. You will also find the recording of the previous meetings as well as registration links for upcoming meetings. And our next meeting, we have an add-on. We weren't originally planning another meeting this month, and we're going to convene again probably in August. But Freddie Mac has created a new tool. They've been working on it for some time called DPA One Solution. And because everybody loves Minnesota, because we work so collaboratively together and honestly do really great things. Anytime I talk to anybody outside of the state, they're just like, wow, Minnesota's way ahead of the game. So Freddie Mac has decided they would like to demo their tool in our market. And some of you probably have heard from a gentleman named Scott via email. I think he's in charge of getting the DPA providers on board, and I think he takes his job very seriously. So we have invited them to host essentially a webinar, and are going to send out an invitation to all of you. And again, please share broadly so that they can take some time and demo the tool for us, and you as DPA providers can determine whether or not you think that this is a value add and something, a solution that you would like to test along with Freddie Mac. So essentially piloting in our market, the solution is designed for loan officers and DPA providers with the goal of trying to streamline the use, kind of work out some of those kinks and those frustrations in that transaction. And they're going to we're going to do an hour, and they're just going to walk it through and show and essentially make their pitch. So hopefully you are available and can join. And again, please share broadly, and I'll send that information after this meeting, a registration link. And then we will record it. So if you're not available, because I recognize calendars are really full this time of year, a recording will happen, and I'll share that as well, so you can have an opportunity to watch it on the back end if that's the case. So with that, I think I will go ahead and call the meeting to a close. I can do one last, any questions about anything that's been covered today, comments? One last call. All right. I'd love to say thank you to Roxanne and Stacy and Jeff. I appreciate you guys taking the time. I think it's important that we understand all the options in the toolbox and how DPA and shared equity can work, and what the solutions, we have as we try to make homeownership more attainable. So Thank you again, everyone, and hope to see you in a few weeks.